I'm briefly just going to do who we are, a bit about you, and then some examples, and then some top tips and lessons learned. Initially, I took all the top tips from the lecturers and listed them at the end, but it produced a massive long list. So we've decided that as we go through each example, we'll try and explain to you some of the top tips that maybe the lecturers have come up with, or lessons learned as we go along. So you've heard all about me, and yeah, another plug really, the Engaging Students Through In-Class Technology national group. I'm one of the steering group members, and so we've helped advertise this event here. I was supposed to put a link up to our website, I've forgotten there, but we run events as well about Zappers, so if you want to continue to come to the Zapper events, then we'll warmly welcome you to our future events. Fiona, to my right, is from the Faculty of Medicine as well, so with me. She works in the anatomy department and she's a histology teaching fellow. And then Charles, to my left, is actually a master's student doing a master's on teaching in chemistry, which involves the use of Zappers in chemistry, but not just that. But I think is also probably, maybe a technician's not the word, but he's helping support a lot of the chemistry teachers to use Zappers. So maybe some that wouldn't have got round to it unless they had someone come and help them distribute them and get them going. I think Charles is doing quite a lot of work there. I've also listed though all the other lecturers or what their roles are within the university have provided me with some examples of how they're using what we call Zappers. You'll notice we call them Zappers for some reason. In Cardiff we called them clickers. I've just about got used to it now. We call them Zappers in Southampton. So their names are listed there and I decided to mention them. So our first polling question, we initially actually were going to have that question, are you a lecturer, a learning developer, and we decided that question will probably already have come up during the day, and we were right. But because a lot of the examples we're given, just by chance, happen to be science, but whether it's just by chance or not, I don't know. I know one English lecturer who was just too late in giving me examples, but I guess it does represent who's using them in Southampton. I think it's a lot of the science lecturers using them. If you could vote for us on what kind of level of science knowledge you have at the moment, so we know how many people are very sciencey and some people have learned through the University of Life only, that would be really good for us. I presume you're all onto the new frequency of 71. Okay. Wow. That's a pretty impressive range, isn't it? Okay, so a real diverse audience really in your science background. Do we ask them any science questions? I think it's quite useful for some of them. I have to say that in some of the examples we've given, like one of the maths ones, I think we've purposely chosen some that we at least have a clue what it means. So you might actually think some of our questions seem a bit easy, but perhaps that's just presents a kind of choice over which ones we feel most comfortable showing you. So the four types of examples that I was going to show you, that the polling's closed. It's just F4, isn't it? I didn't have glasses to press it. We've got an example of it being used in outreach. We've got examples at the start of the course, so to do with transition support and also diagnostic testing. We've got more examples that are more what you would do during a course, so during kind of more standard lectures, about how you might assess and access prior knowledge, experience and skills, generally just making lectures more interactive, but also a very specific example that was done in chemistry where they used it to provide rapid personalised feedback. And then we've also got more examples about at the end of courses, so someone piloted its use in a whole faculty for doing module evaluations, and also we've done some revision quizzes, we've got some examples. So if you'd like to vote, which would be your top which would be your favourite for us to talk about? We will probably try and do them in the order that it comes up. We might have to whiz through a few slides to do that. Okay, last few seconds. I'll look at your countdown times on. Okay, I reckon it's your rapid personalised feedback, just myself, that's driving it that way. Okay, so we need to do during a course, come back to at the start of the course, and then if we have time do outreach at the end. So during the course, I'm going to talk about this first one. So a lot of lecturers, I think, first start off using Zappers and they know they're available and they want to make their lectures a bit more interactive and they're not sure how. This first example is actually from a colleague of mine in nursing who was doing this lecture on respiratory assessment and interventions for deteriorating children with quite a wide-ranging audience, and actually she did ask my advice here on how she could use them. And so my kind of advice was not to use them too often, because she had a fairly traditional lecture that she was initially planning to do, and she still had quite a lot of information she wanted to cover, and she was new to Zappers. So she did, I think, 3 or 4 questions in a 1-hour slot, but one of them she did at the beginning, I would say, was to try and assess the prior knowledge and skills of her audience, so that they could tell her how much experience they already had and what they already knew about different subject areas, but also for them to get to know each other a little bit and see where they fit amongst the rest of the audience. So this was asking them what they already felt confident with in nursing children, to get that kind of information about prior experience. And then throughout the session, in a couple of places, she just had some questions which are really asking about knowledge, really. So which of the following is false about respiratory distress? And I kind of encouraged her to use not just factual recall questions if possible, though it was always difficult to come up with them, but to use this to make them access their prior knowledge. Rather than to test them, it was before she taught on this subject, she was making them think about what they already know on the subject and testing them to try and get the cold learning experience, really, that they think about what they already know before they move on. Okay, another couple of examples where people have just used them to make the session a bit more interactive. It's been used for referencing and academic integrity in the Faculty of Medicine. So this lecturer gives quite a lot of information about what academic integrity is and what we call plagiarism, and goes through quite a lot of information, and then at the end of it just asks a few questions to test their knowledge so that they can apply what they've just been taught to see whether they really still get what plagiarism is. She's asked me to specifically note at the bottom, she didn't make up the questions herself, she took it from a plagiarism booklet made by University, so there's quite an established test to ask students about stuff, and she used that within her lectures to just test what knowledge they already had about plagiarism. This one's more specific, so she told them on that course what type of referencing system they're going to use, and then gave them a specific test to see if they knew how to do that on their course. So just a couple of examples there. One more example from me before we get onto the rapid personalised feedback. Just one more. This example I wanted to show you because I think it shows a nice example of where it's good to use Zappers when there's not a right and a wrong answer, and actually that's the whole point of using them, is you're trying to illustrate what a range of opinions there is within the group. So this was a lecture being run by a physiologist, a sociologist and a psychologist, trying to talk about pain so that they don't just think about those separately, they think about all the aspects of pain, and particularly the diversity in how people perceive pain. So in this lecture, this was one of the first polling tests she did. Basically 2 lecturers stood at the front doing the cold presser test, where you put your hands in a bucket of ice water, and before they did it, they asked them to predict who they thought would last longer. So from here you just know as a male and female lecturer, and you might think that they actually chose the man, but they didn't, they chose the lady, they chose Sally. And I think that's some of the next questions. So then there were some questions about how would you score the pain. So based on what they observed of the person while they were stood there, trying not to take their hands out of the bucket, they had to kind of score it as well. And again, they put the gentleman's pain slightly higher than Sally's pain. And then they got them to just think about it and think about why did you think it that way? You know, what are your social norms, or how has society made you kind of predict who would help deal with pain better than other people? So it was trying to get them to think through it, and apparently Sally's taught them quite a lot, and they think she's quite stubborn and determined, so that's why they put at the start she's going to last longer. But I think it's a really good way of, rather than just saying people perceive things differently or people have different opinions, to actually get the group to actually provide that data that then you're discussing. It's much more powerful than just sitting there and saying different things. The other really nice thing she did was about plasters. This was the students' answers. Okay, I know it's the reverse, but it's showing the same kind of thing. It's almost a 50-50 split. So she then did a whole series of questions. I think I've put some on here, yeah, So she gave out plasters, they all had plasters, and they all had to put plasters on their arms. And that she asked them what level of pain they anticipate pulling it off. I've put these in the wrong order to how she did it, but I just thought it was interesting. So they anticipated quite a lot of pain, but when they did pull it off, and she asked them how much pain they had, they didn't have that much pain. But what she naughtily did is she told them that actually they're not going to pull it off, their neighbour's going to pull it off, which isn't what happened in the end. But then she could cast some votes on how frightened you now you think it's your neighbour going to pull the plaster off. And basically, she did this question as well, so she could show it from the different stats and from this. It was trying to illustrate that you might feel differently about someone else pulling the plaster off than pulling it off. And actually, she had a beautiful excerpt from a book, which is about a burns victim who, when he was rehabilitating, was in a hospital where it was routine that when they had a bath and they had all their bandages taken off, the nurses were told to rip it off quickly, and they'd just been told that's better. And he went away and sort of did a bit of research and went back to them and said, you know, most people actually would prefer that you did it slowly because you're not in control of it. You'd rather sort of people did it slowly. And it did change their practice, although there was then a discussion about how painful is it for the nurses to do and do they cope with it better by just doing it quickly or not. But anyway, I think it was a really nice session showing where I think the teaching design was there to start with, and they just used the Zappers to help illustrate a point you're trying to make, which is far more powerful by getting students to experience it than I think by actually just talking about it. Now on to the rapid personalised feedback.
So in chemistry we own a couple hundred Zappers, and what we've done with them is we don't have the ones with a nice little screen on them, we've got the old ones, and over that area, so over the logo, we've put a piece of paper and it has a code on it, and so A 1 to 12, B 1 to 12. Why 1 to 12? We happen to have several lecture theatres with 12 seats across, and it just makes it easier for getting them in and out. And this allows us to assign them to individual students. Now, during the year, we have multiple in-class tests, and they are credit bearing, so they are important and perceived as important by the students. And you have, that's kind of 4 per bit of chemistry. Chemistry is generally split into 3, inorganic, organic and physical, and so it's basically 2 per semester per course. And they are done under exam conditions. Okay, it's not a massive percentage, but we get them in, and okay, it's not really exam conditions because it's in a lecture theatre and you can see about 8 people's papers in front of you, but we still try and at least give the impression of exam conditions. But we take in the answers using Zappers. That's the next one. So the way they will do the exam is they'll sit there, they will work it all out on paper, but the final answers, and some of them they'll be working out long answer questions, but the final answers they'll work out on paper, and then they will write down on another sheet the basic order of, okay, I'm going to be polling 1, 4, 3, 1, 4 as my answers as questions go through. This way, the marking gets done automatically, but they keep the paper copy is kept by us, so they can't change anything. But they keep a receipt of basically what they wrote down and what they thought they answered. And what this does is this takes the checking of the process away from the lecturers. So that instead of having, if someone wants to challenge it and says, oh, actually, I think I might have put the wrong answer in, we don't have to paper mark any of them. If someone disputes one, we pull out their paper copy and we go through and go, no, we've got all the correct answers for you. How will they know if they've had, the answer seems to be different for the one they entered in here, one on paper? And then later that day, we generally try and have a turnaround of around 24 hours. Students receive personalised feedback to their student email accounts. How do we do all this? So we have, so the feedback ends up looking like this. So you can see they've got here, that's what the whole class has got. And we felt that's a really important aspect, because if you've got it right, and everyone else has got it right, all that really tells you is actually that question was maybe a little bit too easy. If you've got it right and no one else has got it right, that's a massive boost. If you've got it wrong and everyone else has got it right, if you were one of those people, then you've got something to think about. Okay, and it adds that extra, and a little bit of competitiveness goes a long way at university. So the feedback is personalised. Okay, so this particular person, they answered B, and so your response B, correct, well done. Now some of these, the answers, it was simply just correct, well done. With others, for instance, classic problems in chemistry are you're dealing with very, very large numbers of very, very small things. And so often people like miss a divide by 1,000 or a multiple of 1,000, and they get the units wrong. And so and some of the questions will be deliberate. We'll put in wrong answers, which are common mistakes. Obviously, this is part of the formative assessment, in that we hope they will be picking up their own common mistakes. And so we'll be able to say in there, you clearly forgot to divide by 1,000 at this point. Obviously, that's not right all the time. They might have got there by a much more convoluted route, but hopefully most of the time we do. We've all been there. We know what the common mistakes are. As well as that, it will give specific reading and point to other places. So here we go. Here's a more detailed one. And in this case, the student got it wrong. They answered D when the correct answer was in fact E. And yeah, it does explain in very specific. Now, obviously, this is quite scientific language, but this is the language which they should be using on their course. And again, it's a skill we try and build up in chemistry. Yeah, this is where do I actually have a slide which tells us how we did it? No, I don't. Right. I have to explain how we did it. How do we get to this personalised feedback? First of all, we said we've got Zappers, which are labelled up in this coding system. Each student is assigned, and those codes are filled into a something list, what they call participant list. Okay, each student then comes to that lecture, and they will pick up their Zapper. We tell them which one there is using an elaborate mail merge, and also we have lists in there because inevitably some always forget. In fact, one of the first times this was done was with my undergraduate class, and I was one of the ones who forgot. So you come to that, so you should be holding the correct Zapper. We try, again, this is why the 1 to 12 say, right, go to this row, and that speeds up the logistics, which made a big difference. They do the exam, they have about 15 minutes to enter the questions. Then, of course, it goes into the data, which Turning Point collects. We take that raw data, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, which already has the list of students, and therefore that has the information students, then what they put for each one, and then we can use functions within Excel to kind of say, okay, if they put this, then insert this answer. If they put this, using lookup tables. That then exports to a piece of mail merge software, which then is sent out to all the students. You think this sounds complicated? Yes, it is, and this is why we don't do it anymore. And this is one of those things. It was so man-hour intensive that we realised, and it was just becoming more and more difficult. And we don't have. We are really quite short-staffed, and we don't have the time to do this. This is almost an entire day's work for someone who knew how to do it as well. I don't actually know how to do this because David, my boss, refused to teach me because it was so complicated. The other problem we had is if the Zappers aren't quite right in the participant list and someone gets it wrong, it affects all the ones below them in the list. And thankfully, that never happened until the last one we did, the one we did 2 weeks ago. And thankfully, it was someone whose surname began with a W. So we only had to re-enter by hand the last few entries. But there are so many problems which could lead to it. But that would have been a disaster if we sent it out. We would have had 10 students who would have come back saying, these aren't my results. And we would have looked ridiculous. And this is what we've gone over to now is actually using Blackboard and doing quizzes through that. The big disadvantage, which we're trying to find a way over, is we can't do that in examination conditions. They could be away, they could be sitting there with a textbook open, or more likely Google, and be able to work it through. And that's the thing. This one has some definite advantages, but the big disadvantages have made it unfeasible.
I guess the other one you said to me is that they can't see how they do compared to
Yes, that's the other big thing. Is Blackwell will give them customised feedback, very good at that, but it won't be able to tell them, because they'll be doing it sporadically, it won't be able to tell them the graph of how they've done against their peers, which we feel is a major advantage of using turning point for this purpose. Okay, it's me again. Again, my boss's name up there again. The transition is a particular problem. And when we talk about transition, we're mainly talking about the transition from A level to degree level. And here we've made some quite sweeping generalisations. And if you were to turn to me and say, prove it, I can't. But if you were also to ask similar questions to many other academics, they would agree. We're going to have to assume many of these things are true for the purpose of this talk. So students that we're guessing now, and this is as compared to 5 years ago, as little as that, okay? They're much less independent. And spoon feeding is a particular problem, and many teachers will admit they're guilty of it because it works. Okay? Whereas at university, actually, we're trying to create high level skill sets. They're used to extensive, near constant feedback from teachers. They hand in a piece of work, it gets handed back to them with red pen all over it, or green pen for more politically correct schools. And also, in Ofsted inspections, one of the particular things is you're not allowed to do anything for more than 15 minutes. It's got to be in these little chunks. And they come to university and we expect them to sit still for an hour. Or in the case of our current third years, they have 4 lectures in a row in the same lecture theatre, which we thought was particularly cruel. So we're looking to tackle this, and this project was funded through the Royal Society of Chemistry. It's a hefty funded project called Chemistry for Our Future, and actually initially paid for David Reed and several other chemistry teaching fellows. He used to be a teacher, came into this, and it was a really excellent project, and we got a lot of work done on the ground and the grassroots. Some of the other problems, which are kind of perhaps a bit more abstract, is demand of A levels has gone down. Now this is a contentious issue, and because of this, we did a full review, and when we say we, I mean I, did a full review of all the chemistry A level content, and it has gone down. And it's also changed, and some of the more challenging things have been dropped in favour of slightly fluffier things. And students have the advantage that they could just go to one place. That revision guide, although the ones we found did have mistakes in them, which was very worrying, they're just not prepared for the university environment where you are expected, and often explicitly told, oh, you need to go away and just find extra information. Where from? Can I go and buy this book? No, you've got to go to half a dozen books. So, Zappers were one, again, we call them Zappers, not entirely sure why. Using chemistry lectures. So we ran A-level revision sessions, the post-lecture quizzes, so after a series of lectures, that was kind of your, actually, have they learned what we were trying to teach them, kind of classic style. Integrating the lecture hasn't happened as much, but there has been some effort to make it, but then it's almost a case of, can we justify the logistics of getting them in and out, making sure everything's working. An interesting question, which I'm sure anyone who's tried to use them has had to tackle in one way or another. I've actually already talked about that, and we'll later. Student feedback is another very interesting one. We used to, well, we still do, give them the university certified form, bit of paper which you fill out, and 99% of them would come back with just the numerical sections answered, and then any other comments bits would be blank. And in theory, these were anonymous. However, you could always spot which my ones were, because they were the ones with the essay written on the back. So I was always quite opinionated about how I was being taught, and still am. It was an interesting way of getting much more rich feedback and actually getting it there and then as well. Here's an interesting point, is shapes of molecules. Seems is very basic to first year undergraduates. They think, we did this at AS, it's really obvious. Okay, and And we also take this as an opportunity to start talking in university language. Now, at A-level, they use proper systematic naming, and there's proper kind of ways of doing it. For instance, something like, what's it called, acetone. We all know it as acetone. All our lecturers call it acetone. It's not actually called acetone. It's, I've actually now forgotten what it's called.
Vinegar.
It's not vinegar. That's acetic acid or ethanoic acid. There we go. That's an example like that. But ethanoic acid is its official name, but lots of people still call it acetic acid. And unfortunately, this is a problem which is never going to go away, because all our lecturers were taught 50 years ago. And they were taught, their lecturers were taught by people taught 50 years ago, and they're now teaching us. So things either take 100 years to change, or they never change at all. So this was a warm-up question, and we kind of built this. So we asked them, and this wasn't just a quick off the top of your head. We asked them to sit down and draw them out. Okay, shapes and molecules. Okay, this is one which is kind of a bit like a pyramid, straight lines. What ones can you think of? So we gave them a good 5-10 minutes. This is in quite a school style. Here's the problem, go away, deal with it, and then come back to me in a few minutes once you've had a chance. And again, discussion can take place. A bit of peer learning thrown in there as well for good measure. And again, the point about this one is, okay, so we've got a variety of answers, something 5, something 6, 7, 8, peels off towards the end. In the first year of the degree alone, they will encounter at least 12. Okay, the fact that only 2% thought there were more than 10, this was our wake-up call. This was right at the beginning of the course, where we go, we don't really have much, I don't really agree with people who say, oh, you have to unlearn everything when you go and do a science degree, because what you were taught before isn't correct. I think that's a little bit of a lie. I think what you have to learn is that the models you've been taught are not necessarily sufficient to explain everything later on. And so this is a major part of that, is actually pointing out that they don't know it all. And we know more than them, which is good. We've got a few more examples here, which is a kind of common misconceptions. If you follow the constructivism model of teaching and learning, obviously misconceptions are pretty much the worst thing you can have, especially in a subject as complex as chemistry. You don't want to have them. So if we can get the basic ones addressed early on, okay, 81%, that's pretty good. You've still got 20 students, maybe a couple more, who aren't getting that right. And the feedback we got was that even when the majority got it right, they still liked the questions being gone through, because they felt it was important. So even the students who got them all right.
Thank you very much. Just one other example on the transition, really. This is a lecture I did not long ago. Just to say that I think this principle of, again, whether it's correcting or not, but establishing with the students at the beginning that you know they might have been taught some stuff beforehand that might not be technically quite accurate. Whether you say that was just complete rubbish, start again, or whether you kind of say, well, that was just trying to simplify it for you and I can understand why you were taught that, but we're going to move on. I found that myself. So in physiology, some of you may or may know anything about this, but all I can tell you is that this top answer here, that 35% of the students chose, is not correct. But I've bought lecture revision guides for biology and I've seen it taught there. So I kind of learnt over the years what things students have been taught in A-level that then make it harder for them to understand you later on. Actually, this question, I didn't know that they didn't know this. It was something else. But at the end of a lecture that I had so many questions from students, it made me realise that. So this is what I put up at the next lecture. I already knew lots of them had this idea. It's given me an idea of the quantity, but I think it helps the students understand why I'm now going to just spend a little bit more time going over this. That it isn't just one student came up to me. 35% is enough for me to think that it's worthwhile going over this exercise. So quite a lot of bits and pieces there about transition. One final one, I think, this is from a colleague, Vesna, in maths, who uses a diagnostic quiz at the beginning of her course as well.
So yeah, this is just a very quick example of how mathematics use it. Again, this is using induction, so we're talking the first week or so of the term for mathematics students. As Shelley has already said, we've used some fairly easy examples here that were within at least my grasp. So if any of you are panicking about the level of mathematics, this is a nice easy example. Really, she obviously gets feedback from her year group, a level of understanding from her students. So, as has already been mentioned, in chemistry, the examination boards do vary across the country. We also have students coming in from outside the UK, so it's useful to our tutors to understand the level that their year group is at. It's also nice for the students themselves to get a little bit of understanding where they are within their year group. But primarily, I think mathematics have found that it helps the year group come together. Just to start the year off, it's a good way of diagnostic testing, but it's also a good way of getting them to interact and start the year off. We've got another example here. You can see that a few more of them got this one wrong, but still the overwhelming majority got it right. Again, as I said, this is a fairly easy example. So that's really just how maths are using it, not really testing for the students further down the line. This is really at the beginning of the course. And finally, she asked them just did they like using the technology, and as I think we've all really found in the University of Southampton, the students do very much enjoy using Zappers or the clickers to check their knowledge and get feedback on them. Okay, so I teach primarily in histology, and at the end of our semesters within the Faculty of Medicine, we've started doing revision weeks just before their examinations. We found these revision weeks, we found them very popular with the students. But with our year groups, which in my case I'm teaching upwards of 220 students, it's obviously very difficult to incorporate sufficient revision to those year groups in a practical setting. We get very limited timetabling. So this is how, it's moving right side. This is an example of how I would introduce revision to the students. So if I go on to the next question. So we've got a picture here. Now one of the disadvantages is that this picture at the front of the lecture theatre has to be sufficiently large for the students to see. The problem with that is that I have got asked the question, I've got a nice large image, but the actual answers are then on the following slide. So it isn't quite as it would be in the typical examination setting of a spotter, which is very much factual reading. However, because of the images, it is a necessity. So the students ask their question, they get this image, and they are put under time pressure to answer this, because again, in the examination, a question like this would be answered within 30 seconds by our students. We then move forward to the slide with the potential answers on for the students, and they are then again put under time pressure to answer this, because in the actual examination all of this would be done within 30 seconds. And once they've all entered their answers, we have a graph here to show you. We then move forward to the answer slide. Now this is something that I will always annotate quite extensively, and essentially respond to the student group that I have. So if everybody has got that correct, then essentially I will just reiterate what they're looking at and go over it very briefly and move on to the next question. But it does of course allow me to respond to any question that they have got very wrong, or again perhaps under 50%. I would spend a lot of time going over that area and explaining what they're looking at, and perhaps responding to the misconceptions they have about that area. So for them, it allows them to see where they are within their peers. It allows me to respond as well to the year group. And although we don't do the personalised feedback that chemistry do, we are able to respond and say, well, actually, this is a very simple, straightforward question, and I would expect that 98% of you would get this correct. So it is a general year group thing, but with a group of 220, it does work very efficiently for revision at the end of each semester.
The other thing I'm quite interested to share with you, because I thought it was slightly more interesting, is that, sorry, that sounds terrible, but more unusual, is that one of my colleagues, Mary Jane Baker, in the School of Health, or it was school, it's now Faculty of Health Sciences, did a pilot project where for, I think, all of one programme, I think all of the nursing, for each module they did the module evaluation. They changed from doing a standard paper-based evaluations to doing it with Zappers. I think the original main drive of it was just the lack of admin staff that could read computer readable sheets, and so that even though you got them done, it took quite a long turnaround before you get the results back from all your students, and they're a bit frustrated by that. So they tried using the Zappers. I'm showing you 2 slides because there were lots of slides, but she sort of noted that when she was, say, doing one with 200 students, within 20 minutes she could get the same information that she would have got from the sort of 2-sided questionnaire. The university gives you a standard one and most faculties use it, so there's probably 20 odd questions or something, and this is a kind of typical one. But each of them, she did poll them and show the results live, except for this one where it was like, how do you rate your lecturer? So all the rest were live, those were like that, and I just done one quick slide to kind of summarise. I don't know why the poll is open, it wasn't supposed to be, but hey, about the key things she found from that. So it was way faster. You know, the lecturers liked it because they're not having to wait for their data and they have it immediately. What was really quite good is that rather than sitting there thinking afterwards, why did they say that learning resources aren't very good this year, that a discussion could be had with the students immediately so that you could kind of elucidate what might be behind certain answers. But what she was really surprised by was the module leader anxiety. Some staff found it really awful. They just really were quite frightened about doing this with the charts coming up in front of them. I know that it wasn't coming up about them personally, but if they're in charge of the module, I guess they're taking that quite personally. So quite a few module leaders would prefer just to get the results when they're quietly in their office and not having to stand in front of someone. Whereas others probably relish the opportunity to discuss it with the students. But I think that Mary Jane was really quite surprised by how anxious some people were about it. She felt there was some loss of qualitative data, although it'd be interesting because, as Charles said, how many times students do write any handwritten comments on questionnaires. There's not always that many, so I'm not sure how much you're losing there. And if you have enough time, so you've given enough time to this session, actually a lot of that can come out through the discussions. How much students would want to say that, because then obviously that's not so anonymous, I'm not sure. But I suppose if you put them in groups and they're just representing their group, it might work. But Mary Jane did say that that was limited because this was with groups of 200 students, and just logistically, she was going around doing it for every module. You know, she didn't have a massive amount of time to do that. And then the other point she's made, which is one of the top tips that have come from every lecturer, I think, really, is that you always have to accept that some students just like to be a joker. I didn't notice, but I don't know whether he did it purposely or not, but like this morning's lecture, there were multiple slides where someone voted 6 or 10, and like the only options were 1 to 5. And I thought it's probably the best way to do just to ignore it, because otherwise you're encouraging it. But you get that with Zappers in any kind of teaching setting, don't you? And with the evaluation, you might say some students were just trying to, you know, in front of the lecturer to say this. But equally, that student may well have done that on the hard copy as well, to be honest, so I'm not sure whether it's any more inaccurate than the hard copy version. But I think it was quite an interesting project and a different way of using Zappers.
As you noticed, 5 people have answered this question.
I just didn't think, probably, yeah, there wasn't meant to be a question there. So I think the only thing we haven't done is outreach, I think, and you're welcome to ask. That's again chemistry, so you can always ask Charles about it. As I say, I've taken out all the big long list of top tips. I think the thing I left in was that chemistry again had some feedback from students about Zappers, and this is what they say: it keeps them awake, makes them think about their learning. Thanks. Instantly check, get feedback, and anonymity, and I think that's come through again today at most Zapper conferences. I think in sort of formative learning, the fact that it's anonymous is how you get so many students to engage, I think, sometimes in the value of it.
I think that it's worth emphasising that they keep you awake in lectures is it's come up again and again, and students genuinely are grateful for, and this is, no matter how poor the pedagogy of your question is, it's still waking them up, and that's something, and the students really do appreciate it.
I think we were discussing this earlier. I think if you're in an institution where you're still kind of the minority using Zappers, you can use them quite poorly probably, and the students still just really appreciate it. And I think we're probably like that in Southampton with what have you. If we were competing against the Eric Mazurs and stuff, we might not have such good satisfaction probably, but there you go. But I think some of the points you made earlier is that actually in chemistry they admitted, although you might think 90% of us got it right, quite a few of us were guessing. So actually sometimes when we think you don't need to go through it, maybe still a few sentences about why a question's right and wrong is probably a good thing to do. And they were just keen that you do it more and to test understanding the concept. So I think in chemistry, David Reed has worked really hard to come up with questions